For more on China-Russia ties is Anton Fedyashin. He is an expert in Russian studies and the executive director of the Initiative for Russian Culture at American University here in Washington. The significance of this drill, how would you characterize it?
Well, it's the first in the Mediterranean, as you correctly introduced it. More importantly, it introduces two new players who are traditionally not Mediterranean countries. China, which is almost half a globe away, and Russia, which has historically tried to get a foothold on the Mediterranean, but was always kept away from it by European powers and Mediterranean powers. But this is a new era, and this is the continuation of the split between the West and Russia, and Russia's pivot to Asia.
A deeper military cooperation? I mean, is this just growing and growing? Is that how you see it?
Well, it certainly looks that way. Look, we just had the May 9th parade in Moscow, at which 102 Chinese soldiers marched across Red Square. First time in history, by the way. Number two, the Chinese have just invited the Russians to participate in their end of the Second World War parade in September. So there's clearly, on the symbolic and the military level, there are real steps being taken towards a rapprochement.
And we're looking at these pictures now. Obviously, any type of anytime you see two leaders get together, generally, if things are going well, there'll be some kind of economic piece to all of this. How do you see that developing and moving forward, and how important is it for both countries?
It's especially important for the Russians, of course, because of the sanctions from the West. But this was, from the Western point of view, this was a train wreck that was in the making for a while. I mean, sanctions seem to have isolated Russia from Western economies, but they simply turned the Russians towards Asian markets, which, by the way, are afloat in money, looking for solid investments. And so this is the inevitable outcome of Western policies towards Moscow.
And do you see a change then in the pivot from the United States in terms of the State Department and how they approach either of these two countries?
Well, it's interesting that tomorrow Secretary of State Kerry is traveling to Russia. The narrative in Washington has been that the Russians are horribly isolated. You wouldn't think so, judging by the amount of Western leaders that have been visiting Moscow over the past year and a half. But now the Americans are making the effort to go and visit the Russians and talk to them about all sorts of problems, including Ukraine, of course, but also Iran, Syria, and many others. So it seems like there's a sobering up in Washington and a realization that Russia really can be lost to China as a strategic partner.
One Belt, One Road initiative, President Xi Jinping also talking about that while he was in Russia. What do you make of that?
Well, this is a big deal because Russia, of course, is a country that straddles both Europe and Asia. It is, by definition, the Eurasian state, and the Russians have a lot going for them, both over land. The Silk Route the new Silk Route will be a big boon for the Russian economy and for the European economies. The Germans have expressed some very active interest in what's going on. The Russians also have an enormous Arctic coastline, and with global warming and the melting of the ices, the Russians will have an added route along their northern border. So the Russians are geographically in the perfect position to take great advantage of increased Eurasian trade, and that's exactly what it looks like they're trying to stimulate.